Hello everybody, welcome back again to my channel as we talk about some of the things that we can do to pass the time. And it's winter time, so I'm going to be doing probably a lot of book reviews. That's just how it's going to go. It's one of my favorite things to do. I love the library. I love browsing. I like being able to pick out whatever I want. And oftentimes they say don't judge a book by its cover, but the reality is that no matter what, the cover is what is initially going to attract you to a certain book. And this is one I picked up purely by happenstance. Now, when I got this, I had absolutely no idea that it was so popular that it had already been made into a TV show and everything else. But the cover was attractive enough to get you interested. Now, the book Shogun, obviously, right off the bat, you can tell that that is going to be based in Japan. As somebody who really loves anime, I was like, okay, why not? I'll give it a shot. When you have these books that are this massive, usually the author has something to say. And so I do tend to gravitate toward these really large books like this because it just seems like, hey, they're writing. They got something important going on. I might as well listen. But this book here, Shogun, I'm going to look it up. I'm going to look real quick just to make sure I have the exact number right on this. But this book has 1,299 pages to it. And honestly, this book could probably be cut down to 450 or 500 max. It had a lot of fillers, a ton, which I genuinely did not think was important at all to this book. You have characters that you're sitting there trying to remember their name. They only pop up once every 900 pages, and they could have just been cut out. I don't feel like they need to be there. The book itself is split into 6 different parts, so 6 books inside of it. And really, I feel as if you read the last 30 to 40 pages of each book, you would have a perfectly fine idea of what was going on in this story. And so much of it was just, I'm going to call it more of a history lesson than anything else. You had very little, well, you did have character development, but this is not told from a first-person perspective where you're moving along with the character. It's more like the character did this, and then they did that, and then they did that. You do not feel emotionally invested in any of these people. Some of them just die outright, and you're like, okay, whatever. You don't really feel anything about that. And well, as I finished it, I waited until I finished the book to really start doing some type of research on it, because I don't really like other people's opinions going into it, which is kind of sad considering the fact that I'm doing a book review right now. But the book, the author here, Henry, James Clavell. I did not expect it, but this book was written the whole way back in the 70s. And so it's over 50 years old at this point. And the author at the time, you don't really think about Japanese culture being that big of a deal in the 70s. It's gotten a lot more popular recently with anime. I feel like everybody watches anime, so a lot more people are invested and interested in Japan than I feel like they used to be. But the author, he himself fought in World War II. He fought over in the Japanese front, and he would talk about some of his encounters with the Japanese, and I believe this book is one of those. He was trying to filter out his experiences and things like that by writing a story. The whole book, first and foremost, got started because he was helping his daughter do her homework. She was reading about a Dutchman that had made his way the whole way to Japan back in the 1500s. And this was prior to Japan closing off its borders for a really long time. And the story itself is very much based on a true story where these things happened. They were real. They were very, very accurate, but the author came in and changed all the names from what the actual historical names were. At least when I was doing some basic research on it, they said that was due to Americans in particular having a hard time pronouncing the original authentic names, and so he just changed it a little teensy bit to make it easier for us to pronounce. But The book itself, when I was reading afterwards, I was looking at other people's opinions on this book, and they were saying they read the book 3 or 4 times, which I thought was insane for comparatively to how many pages are in this book to how almost bland it really felt to me while I was reading it. It was worth reading, but it felt bland. It felt forced. I kind of had to keep going with it. It was more of a, I'm going to sit down and study a textbook than it is, I'm going to sit down and enjoy a story. Which for some people, I understand that that's more what they're into. They want to read a historical fiction, and that's exactly what this is. They don't really read it to be entertained so much as to learn things. But it was a lot of ceremony, a lot of politeness, a lot of what they consider their standards and their etiquette and their manners and things like that. But this book, as we start into the actual review portion of it, I'm going to give it more like a 4 or a 3 out of 10. Probably a 4, because obviously the author did put a lot of work into writing this thing, but I would never read it again. And even many of those, I would not recommend this book for everybody. It's not like that. The book itself is a lot more. I've seen people describe it as sort of the Game of Thrones if it was set in early Japan, and that's accurate. You do have a lot of people, it is them fighting for the position of ruler of Japan. I did not know this at the time, but apparently the emperor, most everybody knows that Japan has an emperor, was just a figurehead. They really had no influence whatsoever on the country. The rulers of Japan, the emperors anyway, they were a very poor class of people. They got basically an allowance from the Shogun, and that is how they lived. The Shogun protected them, and they were just the family, is what they were. They really had no political power whatsoever. But Shogun, those are the people that controlled all the land, all the territory, all the wealth, all the peasants. They controlled all the samurai, they controlled all the other feudal lords, and things like that. And so most everybody, if they wanted power in Japan, they wanted to be shogun. The book starts off from that Dutchman's perspective that Henry Clavell was reading, or Henry, I keep saying Henry, James, this is James Clavell. But it starts off from that Dutchman's perspective, and he is our main character. They just call him Pilot almost the entirety of the book because that's what he was. He was a pilot for one of these Dutch ships trying to make their way into Japan. At the time, you had Portuguese and Spanish Catholic priests that were already there, and that's a lot of the antagonists of the story was the Catholic Protestants and the Jesuits and things like that, fighting with the Protestants. That's a big theme in the book. But your main character, he accidentally washes up on the shore of Japan. Well, he was looking for it, but he crash lands. And when he gets there, he is not treated very well by the locals. And it is his story of him acclimating and turning more Japanese, is what a lot of it is. The main individuals fighting for control of Japan. You have one gentleman named Ishido. That's the guy we're not rooting for. And then you have the other Japanese gentleman, Toranaga. That is who we are rooting for. We want Toranaga to win because throughout the entire book, he is trying to pass control of Japan back into the hands of the previous leader's child. I know that sounds really confusing, and that's what this whole book is. It's confusing, it jumps from character to character often. But as Toranaga tries to gain more and more control in these lands, you just see more and more stacked against him. And he fights his way through it. As I got closer and closer and closer to the end of this book, and I'm talking in with the last 20 pages of this book, you still had no idea what was going on. And I really felt, I was like getting anxious while I was reading it, thinking to myself, there's not that many pages left to tell me what is going to happen to resolve all of this huge list of issues that is going on with this character. And my anxiety around it was very much that I was going to be disappointed because I knew there was no way they could wrap up all of this stuff in the last 20 pages. And shocker to me, they did not. And so, but as they did that, obviously that's a bit of a spoiler in there where I say they did not wrap up all of the issues. You have 1,300 pages only for there to be a 2-sentence twist at the very last page, which I found disappointing, to be honest, which is why this book has such a low score. It's very rare that I would actually finish a book and give it that low of a review, like a 4 out of 10, is because usually if you sit that long, if you're going to invest that much time into reading a book like this, it's probably pretty decent. But overall, the book tends to, I'm gonna say that this book runs almost like a fantasy of the author, where the intellectual love of our main character's life, she is his intellectual love, mind you, but she does not last in favor of the incredibly beautiful one, if that makes sense, which is really unusual to read, where you have them just building up and building up and building up this character for 1,100 pages or nearly 1,200 pages, where you're invested in this one character as the love interest, and then it's just like, oh, just kidding, he's gonna go for the other one. It's really weird. It's really unusual as a whole. I feel like a lot of the book is unnecessary. He could have done a lot less. But then again, you know, I said this is a very old book. So it is what it is. Overall, would I recommend reading it? Only if you are very serious into historical fiction and you want to learn. If you want to read a textbook, if you want to study, that is what this book is for. It's like studying in a fun way, almost. It's not, for me, it wasn't enjoyable, but you know, everyone's different. Obviously, a lot of people have enjoyed this, and I feel like it would probably be a lot better watched in the show. I can't say that I've watched the show, so I don't know how good it is, but it would probably be a lot better visually than it would to read this. And that is my final take on it. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed. If you read it, maybe leave a comment or two about your experience with the book. Maybe you'll just straight up disagree with what I'm saying. But until next time, I hope to see you again.